So we are now on broadcast.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Vineyard CPAC meeting. The time is 6:33 p.m., September 2nd, 2021. Madam Clerk, could you please make the announcements?
Okay, first I'm going to establish a quorum and take roll call. So Member Brantley?
Present.
Member Miller?
Here.
Member Thompson?
Here.
Member Borgia?
Present. Thank you.
Okay, and let the record reflect that you do have a quorum, and members Sylvester and Lewis are not present. So I will read the announcement now. This meeting is live streamed and temporarily closed to in-person public participation. The clerk's office is in the process of hosting hybrid public meetings that will provide board members and members of the public with the option to participate in the meeting either in person or remotely. Thank you for your patience and support. To make a verbal comment at today's meeting, dial 916-875-2501 to provide your contact information. When the chair opens public comments for a specific agenda item or off-agenda matter, callers will be contacted by phone and transferred into the meeting to make their public comment. We do welcome written comments. You can send them to boardclerk@saccounty.net, and your comments will be routed to the board and filed in the record. And now we'll go ahead and take the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. Okay.
Thank you so much. Before we begin, I'd just like to extend our sincerest thanks to all of our first responders who have been working furiously to help contain the fires in both the Caldor and Tamarack areas. Really appreciate everyone's help and support as our neighboring communities are going through a very difficult time. With that said, can we go ahead, please move on item number 1?
Yeah, so for item number 1, this is the North Vineyard Station Specific Plan Transportation Mitigation Strategy located at the North Vineyard Station Specific Plan in the Vineyard community. The request is for early CPAC workshop to discuss a major amendment to the North Vineyard Station Specific Plan to implement an updated transportation mitigation strategy incorporating concepts endorsed by the Board of Supervisors.
Good evening, CPAC members. Todd Smith here, Principal Planner with the county's Office of Planning and Environmental Review. I know the slide says Cameron Shue. Cameron is here and ready, but I want to give a couple of introductory remarks before we get into the details of the mitigation strategy. So if you wouldn't mind, please advancing to the next slide. So to set the context for tonight's discussion of transportation, we wanted to first provide the members with kind of a status of all things housing in the county. So starting with the housing element, this is an element of the general plan that was recently adopted back in July by the Board of Supervisors, and it's a routine element that we update on an 8-year cycle. It identifies a number of programs that are really targeting the increasing housing production and achieving the county's regional housing needs allocation goals. And so I won't get into all the details of the housing element itself, but for context, I want the members to understand that there are many requirements that are mandated by the state through the government code, and really they're trying to achieve a variety of housing choices that are needed to provide safe and sanitary housing for all income levels. And so that last part, housing at all income levels, is a really major priority for Sacramento County, and that includes low-income households. And one of the key strategies that we see as staff to producing housing is really working through some of the nuts and bolts of implementing some of the major master plans in the Vineyard community So we'd like to see ongoing development in Vineyard in some of these major plan areas that we're going to talk about tonight. Next slide, please. So this exhibit shows, just for geographical context, there are roughly 7 large master plans in the Vineyard area, starting with the first 3, 1, 2, and 3 there. Number 1, the Vineyard Springs Comprehensive Plan, which was approved, in the early 2000s. Number 2, in the light blue, the North Vineyard Station Specific Plan, which is the focus of tonight's conversation on transportation. That was approved originally back in the late 90s with some modifications in the early 2000s. Number 3 is the Florin Vineyard Community Plan. That was approved around 2010. And then the other 4, so 7, 8, 9, and 11, we'll skip over 10. I'm not sure where that is geographically, but those 4 are what we call the Jackson Corridor projects. And 2 of those, numbers 7 and 11, have been approved, but only recently, so we aren't seeing any development there yet. And I want to mention all this just for context because, excuse me, all of these plans that have been approved since the late 90s are independent in terms of their land use plans, their financing plans, et cetera, but they all share responsibility for regional transportation improvements, and they all have what are called public facilities financing plans that would fund the required infrastructure. So each of these master plans has a set of transportation improvements that are assigned to them, and then conditions of approval that are associated with the individual, for example, subdivision maps within each plan area. And that development, at the most basic level, that development over time funds roadway capacity projects, among a lot of other things. Next slide, please. So this slide is just a quick snapshot of the status of each of these, the 3 older plans, Florin Vineyard, North Vineyard Station, and Vineyard Springs. So that first column is the number of residential units that were assumed in the ultimate build out of each of those plans. The third column, units approved, is the number of units, as it implies, that have been approved through subdivision maps within each plan area. The fourth column, units pending, is related to subdivision maps that are kind of going through the application process right now. And then the last column is the number of units in each of the plan areas that have been constructed to date. So that's just a quick snapshot of where we are today, and then I want to turn it over to DOT staff for the rest of the slides.
All right, if you could go to the next slide. This is Steve White with Department of Transportation, the design section. And I'm just going to cover the next 2 slides, which talk about 3 projects, capital projects that the department is working on that are in the Vineyard area. 3 projects that have been a long time coming, frankly. The first one is Elk Grove Florin Road, and this one is currently under construction, and this is the stretch of Elk Grove Florin that runs from Gerber up to Vineyard, and it's been 2 lanes forever, and we're in the process of widening it to 4 lanes. And also the bridge at Elder Creek is being widened with that project. And I'm happy to report that construction out there should be complete probably by Thanksgiving. So that one is in the closing stretches. Second project, and this is just north of there, and again, this is once that Elk Grove Florin project is complete, the South Watt piece is really the last bottleneck on Watt Avenue. It's that 2-lane stretch from Jackson Road all the way down to Florin. So it's about a 3.5 mile stretch of roadway. So a very big project. We are just coming, just coming out of preliminary design on that, and we're moving into right-of-way acquisition. And essentially, this project is going to widen Jackson to Florin from 2 to 4 lanes, and we'll have a new signal going in at Wayne Court. And the roadway section in this stretch is actually going to be, I won't say unique, but it's a little different than what you see in a lot of other arterial thoroughfares throughout the county. So ultimately, Watt has to be 6 lanes. This project here really is only on the hook to build 4 lanes, so 2 lanes of widening. But we wanted to get in the ultimate improvements and get bike and ped facilities in this stretch. So essentially, we're trying to cobble together the money to basically build the ultimate curb and gutter and build a class 1, which is basically a two-way bike and ped facility on both the northbound and the southbound side of the roadway. So when this gets built, and right now it's a 2-season project targeting construction in 2023 and 2024, but when this is completed, it will have 2 lanes in each direction, and it'll have a buffered bike lane on the roadway itself, which is, other than the buffer, that's what you typically see throughout the county. And then in addition to that, it'll have this class 1 facility along the frontage. So it's a project that, that's where we're headed in this stretch. And it's a project that we're definitely going to be very proud to deliver when we do. But we still have some heavy lifting to do on the right-of-way side and permitting. The bridge at Morrison Creek will have to be widened. So there's a lot of moving parts in that one. But ultimately, that is targeting 2023 and 2024 construction on that one. And then if we could go to the next slide. The last project I was going to talk about is the intersection of Bradshaw and Jackson Road. And this is, pre-COVID, this was a big congestion point. And now that traffic volumes are starting to recover, we're starting to see, congestion at this intersection again. Jackson Road, as most of you know, is actually on the state highway system. So we're working with Caltrans on this project. We will have a cooperative agreement with them. Essentially, this project is really to make what we call 6x4 intersection. So we'll get the ultimate 6 lanes at Bradshaw through the intersection, and we'll get 4 lanes on Jackson through the intersection. And just by getting that widening at the intersection, that is going to provide a lot of congestion relief, even if we don't widen the entire stretch of Bradshaw and Jackson to 6 and 4 lanes beyond the intersection. Just getting these improvements at the intersection is going to do a great deal for us. At this point, we have funding for design and right-of-way acquisition. So similar to the South Watt project, we're just coming out of preliminary design and environmental now. We should be moving into right-of-way acquisition towards the end of the year. And the goal is to have the construction funding in place by the time we get the right-of-way. So we'll be buying right-of-way in 2022, and we'll also be shopping around trying to get grant funding so that we can pay for the construction when we're ready to go in 2023. And with that, I will turn it over to Cameron.
All right. Thanks so much, Steve. So I'm Cameron Chu, and I'm with the Transportation Planning section of the Department of Transportation. As you heard from Todd, he gave some background on the tie into the housing element, and Steve just gave an overview of some of the capital projects we have going in that area. I'm going to talk about the triggers that are associated with development in North Vineyard Station and some of the challenges that development is facing out there. So if we can advance to the next slide, please. Okay, so to give a little bit of background about triggers, triggers are essentially how the county associates transportation improvements with development projects. So in the early 1990s, development simply paid a fair share for roadway improvements, with the county assuming responsibility for delivery. And this approach had 2 main issues. There were funding gaps between what the fee program funded and the actual cost to deliver the projects. And there were delays that resulted in construction not keeping pace with traffic growth. So in the mid-2000s, the county shifted over to what we call triggers, which required development to deliver a certain set of improvements once a specified level of development is reached. For example, in the North Vineyard Station triggers, 11 roadway improvements are required before development is allowed to exceed 1,800 units. The advantage of triggers is that they ensure development cannot get out in front of improvements. However, the result is that if triggers are financially infeasible to build, projects just can't move forward. And one might think that's fine. If there's no development, there's no impacts. While that sounds good in theory, historically we have seen traffic on our roads grow from developments in neighboring jurisdictions like Elk Grove, Rancho Cordova, and Sacramento. And if development projects in our county jurisdiction are not developing, we're not collecting fees and generating the revenue needed to build roadway projects. So one of the things I previously mentioned was economic feasibility, and that's a reason why the triggers have become a major concern for housing projects. And that's that the triggers are not always proportional to the amount of units going in. So for North Vineyard Station right now, before one more unit can get approved in the plan area, triggers require about $10 million worth of roadway improvements. And while developers will eventually get reimbursed for this amount over their fair share, they have to carry this cost for a number of years, and the numbers don't pencil out for them to front that kind of money for so few units. Another issue is that many of the triggers are based on traffic studies over 10 years old, which was the best available information we had at the time, but may not necessarily be applicable now. For example, in 2010, the traffic analysis might have indicated that a road widening would be needed 1,000 units, and maybe it turns out it's closer to 1,200. Or maybe the studies assume more people would use Florin when they actually use Gerber instead, which changes when and where certain improvements are really needed. Lastly, the current triggers do not account for in-progress county projects. Some of the triggered improvements have already been built by the county or other development, and the county is planning on building a couple of the triggered improvements as CIP projects, which Steve discussed. So the mitigation strategy for North Vineyard Station needs to be updated to reflect these county-delivered projects, as well as some potential adjustments to timing. Next slide, please. So I just talked about some of the concerns with the current triggers. And on March 23rd of this year, the board held a workshop where county staff shared potential solutions and asked for board input. And 4 different strategies were presented. The first strategy is timing adjustments to triggers. The idea is that if a trigger is not needed until a later number of units, we can build up a positive balance in our fee program and use those funds towards improvements that are needed in the more immediate term. And how would we decide if a trigger is needed or not? Well, traffic analysis would be required, which demonstrates that the deferral would not result in any significant traffic impacts or congestion. This generally means ensuring that roadway segments do not exceed level service F thresholds of 18,000 vehicles per day, or the intersections do not gridlock during the peak hour. The advantage of this strategy is it's relatively low cost to implement and does not reopen the project's EAR, although the downside is that traffic may not flow quite as well as if the improvements were constructed sooner. Strategy 2 shifts responsibility for delivering certain priority roadway improvements from developers onto the county. And examples would be South Watt Avenue, Elk Grove, Florin Road. This could be done through changing priorities in impact fee spending or pursuing other sources like grants or Measure A funds. Like Strategy 1, this would not reopen the EIR since the mitigation requirements are not changing. However, our limited resources require careful prioritization to make sure we make the best use of funds, and outside funding like grants are not always guaranteed. Strategy 3 is similar to Strategy 1 in that triggers could be postponed to a later time. The difference is that under Strategy 3, a facility could be allowed to temporarily deteriorate to level of service F. The idea is that for a period of time, roadways could be sized to accommodate typical traffic throughout the day, but not during the busiest hour. Under Scenario 3, the roadway would operate with congestion during the peak hours until sufficient funding becomes available to construct capacity improvements. This strategy could provide a path forward for development if a needed improvement is just too costly to build right away. However, congestion may not be something the community is willing to accept, and this would need some additional environmental review. Strategy 4 is based on the concept of a dynamic implementation tool, which the board approved for the Jackson corridor developments that Todd talked about earlier, which is West Jackson, Jackson Township, Newbridge, and Mather South. This strategy tracks the traffic of individual development projects as they come into the plan area and determines construction responsibilities based on the project's location, size, and projected level of service. One of the issues with triggers is that there might be a project with 100 lots coming in near Watt and Florin, but the trigger says the next improvement needs to get built at Bradshaw and Elder Creek. So the benefit is that the trigger-based strategy eliminates the need for formalized trigger thresholds and is more sensitive to the actual location of development. This works well for new plan areas coming in, but the downside for existing plan areas is that a retrofit is likely to reopen the environmental document and take substantial cost and time to complete. Next slide, please. The feedback that we got from the board was an endorsement of strategies 1 and 2. The board directed county staff to initiate a major amendment process that will develop an updated transportation mitigation strategy for North Vineyard Station, provided it can be accomplished using only those two strategies. Some board members expressed reservations about strategies 3 and 4, particularly expressing concerns about peak hour traffic congestion aspect of strategy 3. Staff were directed to report back to the board if it becomes apparent that any plan area would need to use strategy 3 or 4 in order to move forward. For North Vineyard Station, staff's been doing some analysis efforts to develop an updated mitigation strategy using just strategies 1 and 2, and that updated mitigation strategy will be discussed on the next couple of slides. If approved as a major amendment, we would incorporate it into the specific plan. Next slide, please. So the strategy that we came up with is 3-pronged. First, the Department of Transportation will be delivering several projects that you heard about earlier using SCTDF funding. That's a pot of money that's funded by countywide transportation fees paid by all developers. It can only be spent on a specified list of capital projects that are needed or impacted by development. The second part of the strategy includes building additional flexibility for signing improvements. Before, the rule was before you build your first unit, you have to deliver every single improvement on the list of triggers. This leads to the so-called $2 million house problem. Now, if someone comes in and wants to build half of the units in a trigger set, we'll assign them half of the improvements and then save the others for the next applicant. Lastly, we're proposing to change the timing for certain triggers in accordance with strategy 1. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Slide, please. As you can see in the table, we've reviewed all the triggers associated with North Vineyard Station, identified 12 that will need to be adjusted in order for this strategy to work. The reason why the timing needs to change is to ensure that as units are coming in and generating fees, we'll be able to use those funds to deliver other triggered improvements, as well as repay debt owed to developers that have already constructed other improvements, and ensure there's enough money left to provide timely reimbursements for incoming development that needs to construct projects. In order to analyze that the triggers can be pushed back without causing any traffic impacts, Department of Transportation conducted a traffic analysis using the latest traffic counts and forecasts available. And we found that these roadway and intersection projects can be deferred without causing any roadways to operate level service F, which is the county's general plan policy for urban areas. In fact, there's only one roadway capacity project that we're proposing to defer, which is widening Florin Road from Waterman to Bradshaw Road. This segment has just over 6,000 vehicles per day right now, and we typically only consider widening roads from 2 to 4 lanes once they reach a threshold of 18,000 vehicles per day. Most of the projects being deferred are actually not capacity projects. They're things like roadside shoulders and culvert improvements. We know the pavement out on some roads needs rehabilitation, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to have the developer come in and install a 6-foot shoulder on a road that needs to be repaved anyway. We're better off taking that money and putting it towards a widening project that will also improve the pavement. One last thing to point out is that the table does have 2 intersections on here, Excelsior and Florin and Excelsior and Gerber. We actually do have 2 developers that have currently committed in agreements to install traffic signals at these locations already. So we're still going to be getting those signals based on the original trigger timing. Our analysis just showed that once those intersections are signalized, they'll work for a long time without the need for further improvements like double left turn lanes. Next slide, please. So to help illustrate why we're adjusting the timing for certain triggers, we developed this cash flow chart. The dashed line shows the projected cash flow with the current timing, and the solid line is the potential path forward created by the adjusted timing. So by following the solid line, it can be seen that current debt will be paid back through about 2,500 units, with reserves being built thereafter until 4,070 units. After the 4,070th unit, North Vineyard Station does need to deliver roadway improvements that are partially funded by other plans, such as the Florin Vineyard Community Plan. So if those other plan areas are not developing and generating fees, North Vineyard Station would potentially need to carry the cost of delivering those improvements, satisfy the triggers, and continue building. So the strategy does not attempt to chart a course forward past 4,070 units at this time. But we can revisit this as North Vineyard Station approaches that number of units. At that time, we should have a better idea of what is happening in nearby plan areas. And it's entirely possible that development will also be occurring in Florin Vineyard and Vineyard Springs, which could generate enough revenue to keep being able to build improvements. Last slide, please. So in closing, today's presentation is an early workshop to bring members of the CPAC up to speed on all the different moving parts in the Vineyard area, including the status of development, the status of county roadway projects, and some of the issues that development is facing with the triggers. County staff believes the best opportunity we have to improve roads in the Vineyard area is to adopt a revised mitigation strategy, which will ease some of the barriers to development and result in fee revenues being generated, which gives us the ability to build more projects. So today's purely informational item to let you know what staff's been working on and receive your questions and feedback. We will be coming back to you for a second workshop in which we'll be asking for the CPAC's recommendation on the major amendment, which will then also be heard by the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors as the final hearing body. In addition to myself, I have Steve White with the Engineering and Design section, Kamal Atwal with Maintenance and Operations, and Lou Lee with Traffic Engineering, in case the CPAC has any other transportation-related questions in the Vineyard area. Thank you very much for your attention.
So this is Member Miller, and I do have a question in regards to, so a couple of weeks ago, we saw a presentation about 100 houses being built off of hedge and tokay, which probably means more than 100 cars because people have more than one car these days. So that's, maybe 200, maybe 300 more cars traveling down hedge, which means that they're either going to wind up coming down Florin Road towards Bradshaw or Florin Road going towards Elk Grove Florin. Some may go down to Elder Creek. So was this, I don't know much about traffic flow, so I'm just asking the question. So was the houses being built over there taken under consideration in this?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. So that is part of the Florin Vineyard Community Plan, which is a separate plan area than this one. But it did take into account the fact that there will be traffic growth from those other plan areas as well as Vineyard Springs. We basically used the SCTDF program, which is the Transportation Development Fee Program, which considers build out of the area by 2050. And using that pace of growth, we forecast some development in those other plan areas that would also contribute traffic to those roadways.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, you said that there's going to be no widening of Florin Road between Bradshaw and Elk Grove Florin, right?
If I could go back 2 slides, please.
Yeah.
So this is basically the prior trigger units is what the current mitigation or what the current conditions of approval require, and the segment of Florin Road from Waterman to Bradshaw Road is number 47, which would be required 1,800 units basically before one more unit gets built. Right now, they would have to widen that, and we're basically finding that we can allow for a couple thousand more houses in the North Vineyard Station plan before needing to widen that roadway to 4 lanes. So it's not that we're not going to do that project, it's just that the traffic volumes are not currently high enough where we would justify 4 lanes at this point.
Okay, got it. Thank you. I have no other questions.
Hi,
Cameron. This is Joe Phil Borja.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Member Brantley.
So just to piggyback on that last, those last comments, is the 1,800 homes, does that include the homes that are still under construction in that in North Vineyard Station? Because there's a lot that are more on the Gerber side, but needless to say are still in that development and would contribute to traffic. That's all taken into consideration in these ideas.
That's correct. Yes, that's not the total number of homes out there. That's the total number of homes that have been approved. So we're far below that today. People are going to be allowed to build up to that many under the current agreements that we have.
Okay, and then on another topic, I just seeing all of these construction projects and seeing the amount of housing that's coming to this area and its distance from services, just generally a distance from services. I don't ever see anything about public transportation. Is there not? Because I would assume if there was public transportation, it would probably run along main streets and arteries in the city. And so I'm wondering if there's public transportation that's ever been anticipated for this area, and if these improvements are going to be done, if those are if public transportation is being thought of for this area.
One thing I can say about the plan area is that there is a mitigation requirement that they annex in what we call County Service Area 10, which is a district that assesses property taxes and funds trip-reducing services, which could be transit-type shuttles, it could be guaranteed ride home, it could be commuter incentives for employment, and it would fund those services in general. I don't have any specific information about the transit plan. I'm wondering if that's something that Todd or someone at planning might be able to speak to.
Yeah, this is Todd Smith with planning. I could briefly speak to it to say that I know that the Sacramento Regional Transit District has some long-range planning that has some routes out here, but I don't believe they have any specific near-term plans to provide that level of transit service in this particular part of the county. But we can always loop back with RT staff directly and find out some more specific information if you'd like.
I guess I was just wondering, I suppose if there was anything in the works that would be taken into consideration in these plans, like if they were going to extend light rail this direction or anything like that. But I assume that would be quite an undertaking. So I guess I just wanted to bring that up as we build more homes out here. That seems like it would be just with, greenhouse gases, the price of gas, all of those things. It seems like it would be something to think about, but
yeah. And certainly with our improvement standards, we do require bus turnouts to be constructed with intersections. So we do require the area to be set up for transit. So in the future, if it's just a matter of providing that service, at least we have the infrastructure in place.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but buses are nice, but why isn't RT taken into consideration? You have two main, streets going through here. One's on Bradshaw. You're doing improvements to South Watt and Elk Grove, Florin. And why isn't RT taken under consideration? Light rail stations, for instance. I love taking light rail if COVID wasn't hanging around. I always do. And I go down to the Manlove station and park my car there. But I always thought it'd be really cool if I could get from, here to the Manlove station somehow rather than having to drive. So I don't know how this is done or if it's ever done. Taking a look at light rail and putting, arteries out here in the south area, because we're growing like crazy out here.
Yeah, I can
absolutely. And that's something that has been considered in like the Jackson corridor plans is high bus service that does connect with the light rail stations. I believe one of the lines that was looked at as part of that was high bus service along Watt Avenue that would connect to the Watt Manlove station. But the timing of that depends on development and being able to fund that service.
That's correct, Cameron. Thanks. I was about to say exactly that. This is Todd Smith. And also to add that there's been a change from the time period that the first three Vineyard plans, Florin Vineyard Community Plan, North Vineyard Station, and the Vineyard Springs Plan were approved. There's been a shift in the county's general plan requirement that those four new master plans along Jackson Highway, there is a requirement for those plans to fund a really robust transit service that is scaled over time as development occurs. Unfortunately, that was not an absolute requirement for those first 3 plan areas, but I think it would be a worthwhile point to loop back with Sacramento Regional Transit staff to see if they have any more in-depth plans to bring transit out this way. I know they've done a lot of route optimization over the last couple of years and are shifting some of their transit service model to a more smart ride, or I'm not sure exactly the terminology they call it, but a more on-demand type of service. And there's also a big difference between some of the density that some of these older plans have. When I say density, I'm talking about the number of units per acre. Some of these older plans have a much lower kind of average density that doesn't really support, from a financial perspective, doesn't really support transit service in a way that's really functional, that meets the needs of the people living there. So that's kind of a big change through the general plan update that occurred about 10 years ago. But like I said, we can certainly loop back with our T staff and try to answer some of these questions.
Thank you. That would be helpful.
Thank you. Also, this is a member Brantley. I've only been at this for about 8 months on this council, but it seems to be that most of the things that have come before us have been developers wanting to approve density changes, and it seems like just like what you were just saying, if the general plan was updated 10 years ago, then yeah, if we're approving or if these density changes are being approved and more houses are going in, then the needs of the area certainly have changed. When is the next general plan update?
So we typically, well, I shouldn't say typically, the last major one, like I said, was done about 10 years ago. We are talking about scoping the next general plan update currently, hoping to get enough funds together to do that, or at least begin it in the next couple of years. But it's a very long-term process, and we really do need to do a comprehensive overhaul.
This is Mr. Bill Thompson. I sit on the CPAC board. I'm just wondering, a couple of questions. You're talking about traffic. What are they going to do about the traffic for these kids going to school? I mean, it's getting to be where the other day I had to go to the doctor's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It usually takes me 15 minutes to drive over there. Heck, it took me over an hour to get from Bradshaw to the freeway because of the kids in school. I mean, it's getting to the point where you can't even get up or down the street. I went down Bradshaw today, and hell, they're trying to make Bradshaw into a 4-lane street down there by that high school. People picking up their kids, and I mean, they stop in the middle of the street to pick them up. I mean, something's got to be done about this transportation for these kids because it's getting to the point of ridiculous.
Hey, Member Thompson, Bill, this is Joe Phil, CPAC chair. Thank you for bringing that up. You brought that up last time too. So what I did last month was, right after our meeting, I contacted both Supervisor Kennedy and Supervisor Natoli, as well as Superintendent Hoffman, and also our local CHP liaison in the area to figure out if there is some synergy on safe routes to schools, as well as any enforcement practices that the EGUSD police services, as well as the sheriff and the CHP could potentially have specific to Kingsbridge and Calvine. I did speak with Supervisor Natoli last Wednesday, Bill, and he did guarantee that he's bringing that up to a meeting with Mr. Hoffman. We do have the luxury and the privilege of having Rebecca Sloan, Chief of Staff of Supervisor Natoli, here also. So not to call you out, Rebecca, but I'd like to remind the member of the CPAC folks that Supervisor Natoli is listening to our concerns. Your concern regarding Kingsbridge as well as Calvine, not to say that it's not important, Bill. It might not be the right timing right now because they're talking about the NVSSP triggers. But rest assured, I'd be more than happy to follow up with you because I too was got stuck between Sheldon High and I want to say Smedberg or Toby Johnson, right around down the street. So I did see what you were saying, and I did see a lot of illegal U-turns, especially right next to Bradshaw Christian too, Bill. So I'll follow up with you on that if that's okay.
Okay. I got one other question.
Go ahead, sir.
Trigger Gerber to widen it to make it 4 lanes.
Yeah, this is Cameron Shu again with DOT. We're not proposing to change the timing for any of the Gerber widening requirements. Those would remain as they are.
Well, what are you going to do about this school bus and these garbage trucks out here on Gerber Road? I mean, it's getting to the point of ridiculous. I mean, you got a great big subdivisions. One side you got 2 lanes, the other side you got 1 lane, and you got the garbage truck and the school bus. The school bus stops, and then you got 50 cars backed up on Gerber Road. And it's not getting better, it's getting worse because they're building more and more houses on Gerber Road, but they only got traffic for one way. I mean, the county's got to get its head out of its butt and start doing something out here. I mean, for years they've used this for an area of what not to do, and it don't seem like it's getting any better. It seems like it's getting worse.
Cameron, do we by any chance have any updated traffic counts on Gerber Road?
I'm going to pull that up right now. Which segment of Gerber Road are we referring to?
You figure you can look at Gerber Road from Elk Grove, Florin to Bradshaw.
Elk Grove, Florin to Bradshaw. Okay, I'll pull that up.
I mean,
so that's the section with the new Lennar homes as well as the new homes that are going to be built behind Walmart. That was also, I want to say, approved in the CPAC and went to the Planning Commission before COVID. But
I think that fell through.
I do have some 2019 traffic counts on that segment of Gerber Road. Looks like the current daily traffic is about 10,000 vehicles per day as of November 2019. Maybe a little bit higher now.
Thank you.
That was November 2019.
Yeah, but I mean, is that the 2-lane side or the 1-lane side?
This is just west of Bradshaw.
Okay, because I mean, you get behind a garbage truck or a school bus, and then the people, they see that they come down Gerber at 40 miles an hour. Well, then when they cross Elk Grove, Florin, all of a sudden they're still doing 40 miles an hour going down Gerber to
Bradshaw.
And you can't get them to speed up.
Thank you, Bill. We will put that under notes and try to see if there has been any speed enforcement issues on Bradshaw, as well as the school buses that you have brought up. I did have a quick question for the staff about the NVSSP triggers, kind of going back to Cameron's presentation. Now, Cameron, in 2019, I want to say Todd Smith and Ron Vicari had a presentation back to the CPAC in person where they had a new proposal of the fees in the Jackson corridors specific to the DUEs for both NVSSP as well as the, if my memory serves correctly, both the Vineyard CPAC for the FVCP as well as the North Vineyard Station specific plan. Now, in 2019, they made a pretty strong argument that we would need to raise the fees for every DUE that was there in order for you all, being the county, because you have so limited funds and you need all of these roadway constructions and SB1 and Measure A was not enough, that you've asked us to increase the fees. Now, if I'm reading this correctly, your condition here, not only are you increasing the trigger units, you're still hoping to promise the same amount of developments that the DUEs y'all proposed in 2019 was supposed to deliver. Now, am I misunderstanding this to say that we would now have to wait a much larger trigger for these conditions to be met in order for these projects to be delivered or even remotely started? So if there's 1,800 on, let's say, 45, right, on the CCTC crossing widening, now we would need 4,000 units in order for that to trigger. Is that correct?
Yes, that's accurate. We'd be pushing the timing of that from 1,100 to 4,070 units.
Okay. So it kind of goes a little, I don't want to say opposite, but it goes a little bit differently from where y'all were saying back in 2019 that you needed to really increase these fees as more development is kind of going through the area, both in the Jackson corridor. There was a whole slew of Jackson corridor. Mr. Vicari made a really passionate, comparison on how we would have to raise 500 million. And now you're saying that we would have to wait a little bit more in order for development to trigger, in order for you all to start making these changes. So can you please kind of enlighten me where I'm maybe missing out or the disconnect? Or is this a different kind of reasoning? Was this born out of the necessity to have more housing so that you would try to lower the fees for developers to go into the area?
So
I'm just trying to figure it out. Like, is this more of a traffic mitigation strategy, or are we lowering the burdens for developers to potentially build and not have to pay those fees? Because you came in and asked us to increase the fees, which reluctantly we said yes. And then now you're saying that in order for those fees to even trigger, you need to be building more homes. So I'm just trying to figure this out.
Oh, did you want to say something, Todd?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly as well, because I think there might be a couple of different things going on here. And I do, Jofel, remember that presentation from Ron Vicari back in, 2019.
Yeah, it's been 2 years. COVID.
Yeah. So there's a lot of moving parts here. At that time, that might have been either the Jackson corridor mitigation strategy, which is the I think it's option 3 or 4 that in one of Cameron's slides, the board was saying we don't necessarily support that at this time for these plan areas, or this one in particular. That $500 million number that you threw out, I do remember that specifically being mentioned in that presentation. That was the total ballpark, total capital cost for all the transportation infrastructure that was necessary for those 4 project areas. And some of that does overlap with some of the roadways that we're talking about that are requirements of the North Vineyard Station and the other plan areas as well. So there is a little bit of overlap, but the other thing that's in the mix is the SDTDF fee, which Cameron mentioned. There was a big effort around that same time frame to update that countywide fee program, and I want to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. So is that helpful or not, I guess, is my question.
Well,
yeah. Go ahead.
One thing I want to add in as well is that it's not necessarily that the fee amount's inappropriate. I mean, we take the total cost of all the projects we need to build and divide it by the number of units we have to determine the fee. It's more of a timing issue. So we could tell someone to go and build the project now based on the original trigger timing, but they're going to have to spend $10 million out of their own pocket and wait to get reimbursed from the county at some indeterminate future time. And most developers aren't willing to do that in order to build housing. So what we're essentially doing is saying, we'll keep collecting your fee money as units come in, but we're not going to build anything yet. And then eventually we're going to hit a point where we have enough money to go and build the project. And we're using level of service as the trigger, basically, to say that by building it at a later time and collecting the fees along the way, it'll still meet the level of service policy and not require them to commit a large amount of cash up front with uncertainty about when they're going to get reimbursed.
Understood. So will you be then holding these fees? Let's say if I'm developer A and I can only bring you 3,000 units, you would be holding those fees in some sort of like escrow, Melrose, something like that, before you're liable to let's say, make the changes then?
Yeah, that's accurate. They still have to pay a fee every time they pull a building permit, regardless of whether there's any projects they build or not. And we're collecting those monies within our fee programs.
So if I am a potential homeowner in this area, for example, we have a beautiful park here in Vineyard, actually named after Don and Brendan Natoli. It took us 7 years in order for that park to be, it's supposed to be a turnkey park, and we already waged our war with Southgate, but it took us 7 years to have that built. Now with this system, you're kind of replicating that, but not on a park, on a potential roadway improvement that the folks, because most of the developers are going to pass these costs to the consumers, right? In a form of some sort of mellow ruse. So has there been some sort of argument about the equity or efficiency of this? Because you can have a community that has been promised these roadway improvements and they paid their due diligence in here, but your triggers hasn't been reached yet. And I understand that it's level of service. I'm a little concerned because now the CEQA documents are using not just level of service, but vehicle miles traveled as a measure. So right now, your guys' triggers are not even meeting the state triggers. So that's another set of questions. But is that something that the county staff could have potentially looked at when creating these new measures? Because now we will have a lot of projects kind of sitting there until those units have been reached.
So yeah, to your first question regarding the VMT, I mean, so all new projects moving forward today and on have to use VMT as their metric under CEQA for analysis. But because this project was approved under level of service-based thresholds, as long as what's coming in is consistent with that approved plan, it can just tear off of that environmental document, and there's not a need to go back and look at any VMT analysis. To your second concern about, are we taking in this money from them and nothing's ever going to get built? We are anticipating having agreements with all developers. So when they come in and we give them a certain number of units, we're going to spell out in that agreement either what fees they're paying or what projects they're going to be assigned to build and what the timeline is for that. And if they don't meet that, then we can cancel that agreement and then give that project to someone else to make sure it gets built, or even potentially build it as a capital project by DOT.
Understood. Using those funds that you've kind of already held.
Correct.
As they're building the units. Okay. May I ask, I know Todd had a pretty good kind of background information earlier, but what was the trigger, or not the trigger, kind of what was the impetus behind readjusting these triggers? Has there been a concern in the county that we're just not building housing fast enough, and therefore these fees are a little bit more cumbersome and challenging for developers?
We certainly have heard feedback from developers saying that we'd like to build these houses, but we're not willing to under the current strategy. And basically saying in order to make these projects economically feasible, they need certain guarantees on when they're going to get repaid for their upfront spending on projects. And then obviously,
I would add to that. This is Todd again. That we're trying to balance, obviously, the economic feasibility of development projects, but also trying to deliver some of the transportation improvements, and that's kind of a tightrope. If we're trying to provide housing that at a multiple ranges of income levels, all the way up to above moderate, all the way down to low income, it's really a balancing act, and sometimes we're trying to meet everybody in the middle.
Understood. Yeah. Sorry to take up too much of your time, but when you guys ran a pro forma on these triggers, I'm assuming that you weren't just looking at a balanced budget, but also the amount of maintenance and operations work that you would need, right, in order to keep your guys' budget a little bit more solvent. Now, making that revised trigger unit a little bit harder would make it seem to me like you would always be trying to get that gap between you guys get started to the projects that hasn't hit that certain amount of triggers yet. Does that mean that those specific roadway improvements or projects, I'll give you an example, maybe some of the higher numbers here at 4,070, the Florin Road to Waterman, 4 lanes, and Bradshaw, does that mean that that project then wouldn't be something that DOT would prioritize when you guys are looking for grant funding, or when you're looking at your, let's say, 5-year STIP improvement plan, or even your Measure A kind of use of your funding? I'm just trying to figure out, because like there's a certain need that you said here, but then no developers are kind of meeting that need, but that project is still identified as a need. Now, does that mean that that project then goes second or third in line when you're looking for grant funding, or even a prioritization that you guys may have when it comes to your, like, you know, either your STIP funding or your Measure A funding or any of your SCTD funding? Like, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is that would there then be a material connection between the amount of units that you guys have versus something that you would, you know, otherwise prioritize later on?
Well, I don't think I would see it as necessarily getting deprioritized. I mean, it's still a CEQA issue. If we don't deliver it under whatever revised timing we can justify, you know, we're not meeting the environmental document, so it's going to get built at that point. It's just a matter of the fact that we need to make sure there's enough money in the fee program from developers to be able to build it.
Understood. Now, what about cost of inflation or cost of changing delivery projects?
So yeah, we do adjust our fee programs every year based on changes in the construction cost index. Well, it's a Caltrans construction cost index calculation for our SCTDF fee program. Some of these individual fee programs use a little bit different methodology, but they do get escalated every year to account for the not only inflation, but also the fact that sometimes construction materials can exceed inflation.
Understood. Labor costs, etc. Okay. So you guys are trying to meet the developers in the middle by saying we're not going to raise your fees yet, but we're also like hoping to wait before you have to pay this exorbitant amount of fees until you have to hit that threshold. So for example, if I'm Lennar, you would give me a little bit of time to at least build 2,000 units first, hopefully get some of my investments by selling those houses, and then hopefully reach that part B, right? I'm sorry, I'm trying to simplify it for everybody who's on the phone.
I think it's a good analogy, yeah.
What's the best way to kind of, explain this to everybody? Because the triggers are there, right? It's just, the last few months, everybody's coming in here that the traffic has been really bad. What's going to happen to all of our improvements? Now the county's coming back in layman's terms saying that, hey, before we can even do your improvements, we would actually have to delay it a little bit until more developers are able to bring in more units. So hopefully I'm not messing this up, and I apologize for putting you in the hot seat, both Cameron and Todd. But am I understanding this correctly, that is the kind of the simplest argument here?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we'd love to be able to go out and build all those projects right now, as there's certainly, a lot of benefit to building them. But which is the way the current cash flow works. Our choice is really we either sit here and do nothing, and development moves forward, and traffic continues to grow on our roadways because of growth in Elk Grove and Rancho Cordova and other places. Or, we have to allow some development to move forward now by clearing the path and removing a few of the hurdles. And then at least we're generating the fees from those developments and being able to go out and build these projects.
Understood.
And
what would you guys be using those fees for if it's not being built yet for that specific project in that area? Would you guys just be using those fees and fronting it to another project, for example? Like if I'm a developer and my DUEs were supposed to improve somewhere close to Bradshaw and Gerber, but I haven't hit my units yet. I'm like only 50% there. That cash that's sitting there, would you then use that for other projects for now, just to make sure that you're at least starting some of those projects, or is that just sitting in a kind of in an escrow account gaining interest?
If it isn't a fee program, we do have the capability to use those funds to build other projects that are also in that same fee program.
Okay, it's in the same fee program.
Yeah, so
you would.
We're not pushing all the triggers. There may be still other things required, like maybe 1,800 units that we're not deferring. So we have the capability to take those funds and use it for those projects.
So you would front load the projects that are able to be delivered now timely versus kind of your longer lead projects. Okay.
Right. It's delaying certain projects to later to be able to build the ones we really need now.
Okay. That's a lot of Excel balancing. Because
Oh,
the
you should see
moment
the spreadsheets.
yeah, because the moment that specific area DUEs reaches that trigger, and let's just say we're in an economic downturn, and you guys don't have the money because you've fronted that funds to other projects that were not part of, well, that were part of the fee program, but were not promised in that specific area, then what would happen to the community members then at that point, right? Or is there some sort of a stopgap within the county that allows you guys to say, hey, promises made, promises kept, kind of a, SB1 style?
I'm not sure I understood that question.
So I guess what I'm trying to say, if a community was promised that, hey, you guys need to reach 4,000 units in order for this roadway improvement to happen, and they've been sitting at 75% of the triggers.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm hearing correctly, the county then would use the fees out of that 75% and front load some of the other projects surrounding there, or else that money would just be sitting there stagnant, maybe gaining some interest. If for some reason at the future time, the developer or whoever in that area reaches the 100% revised trigger units required, but the county does not have enough liquid capital to get that project started because you've economic downturn, gas taxes, revenues are not good. We have another COVID-related items. What would be kind of your stopgap or insurance mechanism to make sure that that project still gets delivered?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So we're not proposing to use that money to go and build things further down the line and get out ahead. We would only be using it to build things that are required up to that point. So every trigger, 1,800, 2,000, every trigger we hit, there's certain improvements that are required, and we're going to require them in order as they come up, unless they get deferred to a later time based on this table. So if we know that a certain project is needed at 4,000 units, we're going to be collecting fees for that project as we approach that point. And we've already done the cash flow analysis to show that by deferring everything else, there will be enough money in that pot to pay for that 100% of that improvement.
Okay.
So we wouldn't find ourselves in that situation with the cash flow that we've planned out.
Understood. Would you be selling bonds on that cash flow as well, just to see if there's alternative revenues on that?
No, we're not proposing to sell any bonds.
Okay. So the biggest insurance really would be, ultimately it's the cash flow and the hope that a developer would come in there and meet the triggers.
The assurance is that we're still keeping the triggers. People aren't going to be able to exceed that unit cap without delivering the project.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate. Mr. Thompson, go ahead, sir.
Who makes the decision on how wide these roads are supposed to be in these subdivisions?
So as far as whether roads were planned to be like a 2-lane or a 4-lane or a 6-lane road, that's all in the specific plan and incorporated into the general plan. So that would have all been studied at the time of the initial traffic study for these projects.
Okay, let's take this. Let me give you an example. This Ogden subdivision over here off of Bradshaw. Who decided the width of the roads in there?
Are you talking about internal roads within the project, like the residential streets?
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, sorry, I misinterpreted your question. I thought you were asking about the number of lanes. Those details, like the cross sections for the roadways, in terms of how wide they are and what the right-of-way requirements are, those are all set in the specific plan.
Well, the reason why I'm asking this is, this fire we had down here on Stockton Boulevard the other day where all them mobile homes burned up and a person burned up in them?
I'm not familiar with that fire.
All right. Well, they had a bunch of mobile homes or travel trailers and mobile homes down on Stockton Boulevard. The whole park burned up, and a person died in it. Well, you're going to have the same problem over here in these housing developments that you guys are building now and are putting in, because the streets are too cotton thick and narrow. You're not going to be able to get fire equipment in them to fight them. You got a street
So
that's
each of our
you got 2 fire trucks that are 20 foot wide. How are you going to get trucks in there to fight a fire because you're going to park the truck in the middle of the street so you're not up next to the fire. And the streets are too damn narrow to get a truck by. Your trucks are 8 foot wide. Then you got 6 inches for mirrors. So you got 10 feet. You got a rig that's 10 foot wide. Now, if the fire trucks go, the new law, which is 102, which is 8'4", they will not fit in these streets. So therefore, you're going to have the same mess we got up here in the Forest Service right now with them fighting fires. You're going to be fighting these house fires with helicopters to dump water on to try to put them out. Because you ain't going to be able to get in there with fire trucks. Because it's going to be too hot and the fire is going to be too hot and too dangerous to get a truck into to fight it. Because your streets are too cotton picking narrow.
Hey, Mr. Thompson, thank you for your concern, sir. I think Mr. Smith from the county wanted to say something about them following maybe the fire marshal or at least the countywide. Todd, can you?
Sure, I'll jump in. So each one of our subdivision maps, first of all, let me back up to the specific plan. So each one of the specific plans goes through a very, very thorough analysis of not just the transportation analysis, not just whether the street sections can adequately handle travel flow, but also the applicable fire districts weighs in to make sure that their equipment can pass safely on the proposed street sections. And they also do that at the next level down with individual subdivision maps that come through. In this particular area, Metro Fire has a seat at the table. They review the tentative maps, they review the improvement plans, they review the layouts of the projects, where the lots are, whether they can have access to hydrants. All of that is taken into consideration when developers come in with these types of applications.
So I think what Bill's referring to is, once again, this goes back to 2 different presentations that we've had in the past. One was the one off of Tokay and Hedge, where they weren't going to make any improvements to Tokay, and one of the entrances are off of Tokay, which is now a little 1-lane road, and that road Tokay is not being expanded. And the question is how do you get a fire truck through there? The other one was the Castleman plan over off of Elk Grove Boulevard, and I forgot what the street was, but that street leading into the that new tract of homes over there also was very narrow. And people parking on the streets, because that was the only parking, a fire truck wasn't able to get through there either. So, those are just 2 examples of what I think Bill is talking about and is concerned about.
Well, this brand new subdivision they built over here off of Bradshaw, the streets in there, one side you can't even park on the street because the curbs are all red. And if you got somebody parked on the other side, you ain't going to be able to get a fire truck through there. I mean, either the fire department isn't doing its job or the county isn't doing it. One of the 2 of them is not doing their job.
Bill, thank you for that, and Lee, thank you for that. I think what I'm going to do is make note, but not just make note. I'm going to go ahead and contact our local fire marshal here and maybe invite that person to have a discussion and specifically kind of pinpoint y'all concerns, because with what's going on right now with the fires and with Paradise, you're absolutely correct. We have to be prepared. But I think this evening we gotta kind of rain down and kind of talk about the North Vineyard. But if I'm hearing what you mentioned, Lee, correctly, and if I'm understanding this, so the Tokay lane, the lanes will not be widened, or the improvements will not be met until we hit certain triggers. So if I'm understanding this correctly, we would actually have to have a lot more development in order for some of the concerns that the fellow CPAC members have already brought up in the past in order for the county to make those improvements.
No, I get that, but it isn't, it's disconcerting that they're going to be building 100 houses out there and there's one way out, and that's Tokay. And so, again, it goes back to how is the fire department going to get in there on that little one-lane road? And I do understand that there are triggers, but there also has to be some common sense going on also. So I don't know what the answer is, but I find it very concerning.
I'd like to add something to this. This brand new subdivision over here in the Ogden development they built, they only built the streets less than 20 feet wide. The streets are under 20 feet wide. There's no way you could get in there with a semi or one of them big hook and ladder rigs to get down the streets. The streets are too narrow. If somebody's parked on them, you can't get down the streets. I don't know whether or not, me and my wife went through there, and we looked at the streets. And the streets are so cotton picking narrow that you can't get a fire truck. You can't get 2 fire trucks in there to fight a house fire.
Thanks, Bill. We will put that in the record and duly noted. And I think we need to, I want to make sure that all of the other members of the CPAC have an opportunity to share something, or maybe any of the members of the DOT or the county staff wanting to add something to this. I do understand it is an informational item. Cameron, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We'll be coming back one more time for your recommendation.
Understood.
It's supposed to be over this. Excuse me, but I want to say something here.
Go ahead, sir. Mr. Thompson, go ahead.
Don Natoli was supposed to have I contacted Don Natoli 3 or 4 or 5 months ago when they had that subdivision come in where they're going to put a street in that was 18 foot wide. I called Don Natoli at that time, and he was supposed to get the fire marshal and the man that was the head of the county roads into our thing to listen to us and answer our questions. I have not heard from either one. I have not heard anything about them showing up or anything else. Now, if you can get them in there, you must have more pull than Don Natoli does. I mean, I'm getting a little frustrated with this whole mess because none of my questions ever get answered. Why the county? Mr. Natoli's tried to answer them. He can't answer them. Now, the county can't answer them. The fire department won't answer them. And I don't think it's right for us to sit on this CPAC board and not get our questions answered.
Understood, Bill. Let me, I don't have an answer for you. I apologize. And I don't think that our county planning staff right now can speak for the fire marshal as well. But I will follow up with you separately on this, sir, and also talk to Mr. Natoli about this. I don't have an answer for you at this time. I do know that Sacramento County Fire, both Casinos Community Fire, and there's a number of fire districts in Sacramento County. And so I want to say Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District probably needs to answer that question.
I went down here to this Florin fire station down here at the corner of Gerber and Elk Grove, Florin. I got to talk to the fire marshal down there, and she told me she'd get back to me. Well, I've never heard from her. Don told me he would have the man that was ahead of the roads and stuff had come out to our board along with the fire marshal and answer my questions. And I just talked to him here last week about it, and he says, I'm sorry, Bill. He says, they're not answering my questions either.
I just want to point out, this is Kamal with the DOT Operations and Maintenance. So all the roads within Ogden Ranch subdivision, they're private. So they don't need to meet the county standards, but all they have to do is satisfy the fire department.
Well,
Yeah, but they're not satisfying the fire department. That's our complaint.
Yeah.
So,
So it's not a public road. All these roads are private.
yeah, but still, there needs to be some kind of structure put in place to make sure of the safety of the public.
Yes. Okay.
And I understand that.
Thank you. Not to kind of table this comment, but I'm emailing the Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District right now. I'll be following up with them on work hours, but just to kind of rope it back into this presentation, because I don't believe that none of us have the answers, unfortunately, because we're not all the Metropolitan Fire District, unfortunately. But I do want to go back to the NVSSP presentation. Are there any other comments related to this, to the triggers, to the proposal of the county? Are there any other comments from the members?
This is Member Brantley. I did have another comment. I just wanted to thank you, Chairperson, for helping me to kind of understand in your line of questioning, helping me to understand this further. Like I said, I've only been at this for 8 months, so a lot of this is a little bit over my head, but just because I believe today you guys all of the staff is here to get our opinions and our feedback. And so now that I'm understanding this more throughout the meeting, I do want to just add that it seems like a lot of things that have come before us. For example, I think back in June we discussed changing to the housing to make it easier for developers, and now this seems to be something that we are also doing to help developers. And it's a little bit, it's kind of tough for me to say we should be clearing the roads for developers, and just in the sense that there's a lot of money to be made in real estate, and I understand I don't know all of the inner workings of it, but this seems like a very large jump in these triggers to allow for development and like improvements into the area that the homeowners who are living here already have kind of helped contribute to. And it seems like this, like 1,800 up to over 4,000 seems like a big jump. Yes. To get those things done. And so this combined with, like, you know, for new developments, reducing the size of the yards and things like that, it kind of seems like these things are all taking away from this area. And like I know that North Vineyard Station already they had to wait a long time to get that park. And so now to be kind of like taking things away, and then for new developments to not be to like a higher standard, it just seems like we're taking away from this area, and it kind of feels like it would be nice if we could develop this area to be really, really nice, but it seems like we're taking away from it by doing some of these things. And I really understand and I appreciate all the work that is being done. I live off of Elk Grove, Florin, so I appreciate all of that work to widen those streets. And I know that there's like hard decisions to be made. It just seems like this is a big jump, and it's going to make homeowners and residents of this area just wait like even longer for some of these things. And I know that the traffic counts right now seem to be, I mean, there's so many homes that are still being built over there. So it just seems like it would be nice. It would be nice if we didn't have to do this. Obviously, I know that you're making the case that for money to work that this needs to happen, but it just seems like we're taking away from the area. And so that's kind of my 2 cents about it, or more than 2 cents, sorry.
I do appreciate the comment. And Yeah, I agree with you. It would be ideal if we could follow the original timing of the triggers and get things a little bit sooner. But as you mentioned, that the choices we've had to make are just prioritizing certain projects like Watt and Elk Grove, Florin, and certain other ones for the cash flow to work. We've just had to slide down. But certainly can appreciate the frustration of things taking a little bit longer out there than everyone wants.
And just one last question: are there other areas that are getting changed like this one to accommodate like the growth in Elk Grove and things, the other areas that you guys were talking about on these like main thoroughfares? Is there other areas where money is kind of being diverted a little bit?
So there was an interim mitigation strategy that DOT came up with for the Florin Vineyard Community Plan, which borders the North Vineyard Station Community Plan. That one, we were actually able to get the cash flow to work without having to slide any triggers or make any timing adjustments. That one, we were purely able to get to work by having DOT deliver some projects like South Watt and Elk Grove Florin that were kind of the biggest high dollar items on their improvement list. We are currently doing a similar effort right now in the Alberta specific plan up at the north end of the county. We haven't gotten too far into that effort yet. So far, we've just started looking at the cash flow of some of the bigger projects and seeing if it's even possible for that one to work or not. So we don't really have an answer on that yet, but it's possible that one could include similar sliding of triggers.
Cameron, I do have a quick question. So you did mention that the final decision body here is obviously the supervisory, the Board of Supervisors. There is an absence in the seat of the Planning Commission that represents District 5. So aside from this hearing body, and obviously Supervisor Natoli, this is kind of it as far as the feedback that y'all are going to be getting. And because this is not going through a whole environmental process, the rest of the community probably will not have it's not like you can provide any comments publicly on this outside of this being a board item. I guess what I'm trying to ascertain is what other community feedback have you guys done outside of getting the concerns from the building community, but like what Member Brantley mentioned, changing the landscape of the Vineyard area in order to incorporate these new kind of thresholds. What else has the county done in order to get any other comments from the public or any other environmental groups, social political groups, or any other community organizations?
The Department of Transportation has not done any specific outreach yet. We are early in the process, but I don't know if planning staff can share if there's anything else they anticipate being part of this process.
Yeah, I can, like Cameron said, this is the first stop. This is why we are doing this early workshop, to get an initial kind of a gut check from the community members. We are having some conversations around possibly doing a more in-depth outreach process, but we don't have all those details fleshed out yet. With respect to the Planning Commission, I do know that District 5 is interested in nominating somebody in the near future. I don't know the timing of that, but I don't anticipate this going to the Planning Commission in the next couple of months. It'd probably be, we would have to come back here, obviously, to the CPAC first once we do additional analysis and get other feedback. But I do want to address that one concern you had, Joe Full, about the vacancy.
Understood. Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments from the rest of the CPAC members before we give the county folks an opportunity to close out, perhaps? So obviously it's a very heated item. It's a very contentious item, but not not contentious, maybe a difficult item to kind of take a look at. But we appreciate the county's work, and as Todd mentioned, balancing both the needs, because there is a great housing needs, but also what Member Miller and Member Thompson and Member Brantley had mentioned, just balancing the safety and kind of the overall community makeup of this district is particularly important for us. So we do look forward to further analysis and engagement with the county and the staff, and appreciate your guys' hard work on this. It is a very difficult issue, but we look forward to hopefully having you guys back here, and maybe if there is a recommendation to move or further discuss, then perhaps you guys can entertain share us a little bit more time again to answer some of our questions and concerns.
One more question.
Yes, sir. Mr. Thompson, is that you?
I'd like to know where the water's going to come from for all these houses they're building.
That's not a question for DOT. That's a question for the planners, I think.
Yeah. Might not be Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
Question for the county. He's the one that's going to have to supply the water. Right now,
I can briefly address.
They're not going to get much more water out of Folsom, and a lot of the other reservoirs are already dry. So, I mean, it's going to be if we don't get a good rain this year, God help us next year for the people that have to get water out of Folsom and out of Shasta, because there won't be enough water.
So I can briefly address that, but it may be beneficial to have the county water agency provide some more information. I can just briefly speak to the water supply planning process, which is when projects of this magnitude, these large specific plans come forward, there's a process through which the local land use agency, in this case the county, contacts the water purveyor, which here is the Sacramento County Water Agency. There's a water supply analysis that's done to demonstrate whether there is sufficient water supply available, not just in a single really good hydrologic year, but in a multiple year scenario that includes multiple dry year scenarios. So that's done when we start the specific plan process, and then at each individual map coming forward, there has to be a verification required by SB 610 from a few years back that the water purveyor verifies that they will be able to serve the water to the project based on what they know today when that development's moving forward, because obviously there can be a lot of things in the works between an analysis done many years ago and the current state of affairs. So all that takes into consideration drought cycles, it takes into consideration water contracts, groundwater issues, surface water issues. All of those things are in that analysis.
Well, could that person come out and explain it to us, please?
I can reach out to the water agency staff and see what they can do.
Okay. Because myself, I'm on a well here, and I know they got 3 wells up here on Excelsior they're pulling water out of. The 3 wells pump over 6,000 gallons a minute. That's a lot of water to be pulling out of the ground.
Thank you, Bill. I'll work with Todd offline on this to try to see if we can get someone. If you recall, we did nominate and accept Don Natoli's or Supervisor Natoli's nomination to the water agency and the well water kind of committee. And so I will also contact that person, and hopefully that person will have a much better answer, because we did nominate that person to represent the needs of District 5. So not to put Mr. Smith in the hot seat, but I think we may have other folks who might be better able to answer your question, as well as the fire marshal question too. But I do want to go back to this item. Are there any other comments related to this before I hopefully let the county staff kind of do a close up?
Remember, I also want to let you know that there have not been any public comments, verbal or phone comments.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. But yeah, Cameron or Todd, if you'd like to close out, final comments, but thank you again for your time.
Yeah, I just want to close by saying really appreciate your consideration of the presentation. It's an extremely complex undertaking. There's traffic analysis, there's financial analysis, all kinds of stuff that goes into it, dozens of spreadsheets. So we've tried to boil it down into something digestible, but there's certainly a lot of complex things that have gone into it. Appreciate the great questions we got, and if there's anything else that you think of that we can help answer, I'd be happy to dive in more and give you more details.
All right, thank you so much. We appreciate it. I did have one other thing. You did have a status of developments in one of your slides. I'd like to also kind of see the perspective from the builders on this, whether or not they've sent any support letters that could be publicly accessible, or anything that may have come to your office that would help you guys otherwise put this packet together. I know some of the builders have already not been so happy with some of the CPAC processes, but in a spirit of equity and fairness, I think it'd be good to hear from both sides' perspectives. You guys are able to share that.
Yeah, and I think one of the builders did reach out to me earlier this week and asked if they could submit a letter of support on the project or this effort. But I let them know that this was purely an informational item tonight, and if they wanted to do so, it would probably make more sense to wait until the next workshop when we'd be asking you guys to take action.
Understood. Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you everyone for your time. I don't think we have a second item actually on our agenda. The only other item is staff comments. But Flo, are there any other presentations for today's agenda?
Actually, we do. We have the item number 2 is the community input on Sacramento County fiscal year 2022-23 budget priorities. And someone from the county planning department will be leading this conversation with you guys.
Understood. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Appreciate it.
All right. Good evening, CPAC members. This is Chris Pahuli, Principal Planner.
Hey, Mr. Pahuli, it's been some time.
Hey, I know it has been. I've been enjoying the discussion on the first item. But I'll do the introduction and I'll keep it pretty brief given the late hour. But in your agenda packet, you do have a brief on the Sacramento County 2021-2022 budget, which is just gone into effect. The county is on a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year budget cycle. And as I mentioned, we're just early on in the 2021-2022 budget. However, the county is already starting to plan for the 2022-2023 budget. And as part of the board's direction to staff, they wanted to have some initial outreach done to the various boards and commissions, including the 14 CPACs, to get an idea of where the boards and commissions felt that the county should prioritize budget investments. So we're here this evening to hear from CPAC members on priorities, particularly priorities in the Vineyard community. We heard a lot earlier with the first item about potential priorities. But we're going to be collecting, and the clerk of the board's office is going to be collecting or recording the discussion and the thoughts that you all have about the priorities that the county should be considering and investing in as part of the budget process. So with that introduction, I just want to kind of hand it over to the CPAC chair to facilitate the discussion, and I'm happy to help out and provide additional information on the budget. And we also have a couple of other county staff folks on the line that might be able to help as well.
Thank you so much. Were you hoping to get our feedback, Mr. Pahuli, or
yeah, again,
the presentation?
Again, that is the presentation. the document that was provided to you as part of the budget process just really outlines the 2021-2022 budget and all of the different funding that is provided for, and where, and the different programs and departments that the budget funds. But the discussion is really around priorities for next year, and where the boards and commissions feel like those priorities should be. And particularly, we're looking at the discussion here around the Vineyard community and what investments or priorities you all feel need to be taken into consideration in establishing the county's budget.
So I have one. I actually probably have two. This is Member Miller. So illegal fireworks. It's a war zone out here, and I am on the illegal fireworks task force. Supervisor Frost and Supervisor Desmond are part of that. Part of the issue with the illegal fireworks and moving forward with the social host ordinance is funding. So I don't think that's showing up anywhere in the budget, number one. The other issue, of course, is who's going to enforce it, and the enforcement should be done by our sheriff's department. So, they keep complaining they don't have enough resources, blah, blah, blah. So I would like to see that. I mean, it's not, I would like to see that as a priority somewhere. Okay, number one. Number two, the homeless situation is also a priority as far as I'm concerned, along with housing for folks that are homeless. I know we're using some other term right now for homelessness, but I'm an old fart, so I'm stuck in my ways. So those are the two top priorities as far as I'm concerned in the community that I would like to see. So my 2 cents.
Thank you, Member Miller. Not to call out, but Member Thompson or Member Brantley, could you please give us, 1, 2, or 3 of your top priorities? And I would recommend, if you guys have the packet, there is a kind of a longer breakdown that says public safety and justice, land use, development, transportation, the budget timeline, public utilities, things like that. I would really invite you all to take a look. But Member Thompson or Member Brantley, can you please share with us and the planners what your top 2 or 3 priorities are for the county?
Well, one of my top priorities would be to get the fire department more involved. They need more money to get them get somebody out of the fire department mainly to take care of these roads and stuff that are being made so cotton picking narrow.
Understood, Bill. Thank you. Vice Chair Brantley.
Yeah.
Is it okay if I call on you? Sorry.
That's okay. So I think immediately looking at physically when you walk in the community, drive in the community, I think unhoused people and just the need for support services around those people and leveraging. I know there's a lot of federal dollars that come in. So however we can leverage those to help to help with that situation. I think, and then for me personally, I didn't think too much about this before. I apologize, but the parks, recreation, culture, and education is a big thing for me. I think creating healthier, walkable, bikeable neighborhoods and areas that have trees and shade cover as well. I know that the South Sacramento area, I'm a volunteer with the Sacramento Tree Foundation and their Neighborwoods program, and I know that the South area is the South area of Sacramento, not necessarily all the way out here in Vineyard, but I think also here in Vineyard it's a problem because of all the new developments. just the lack of an urban canopy, an urban forest, or the canopy out here. So investments in that. And as far as like law enforcement and what is that, public safety and justice, from what I've paid attention to over the last few years, it seems like a lot of funding has gone to the sheriff's department, and I think that there's definitely a good number of people in the community who would like less of the jobs put on police's back and more support services for people in like mental health issues, which I think also goes along with the unhoused people, but so that the police don't have to respond to every situation, but we can have other resources. I'm not sure what those are exactly, but to help people in mental health crises, so that the police don't have to respond to every single thing that happens in the community, that we can have other people who can respond specifically with mental health issues. So those would be mine.
Bravo, thank you. I agree.
Thank you both. Thank you, members. I would also like to echo the mental health and homelessness issues that have been percolating. I believe the county has had a lot of plans with Public Health Board, also with now County Executive Ann Edwards taking the helm. She has a background in Department of Human Assistance. I think that really empowering the public health and allied health services staff to make sure that we're not just throwing money into care-resistant populations, but rather looking at it very pragmatically as to how we can hopefully help these individuals. I really do believe that it's sometimes it's just more passing the buck. We move one tent city from the outsets of the county, like in Jackson, and then they end up going to south of Watt. Again, it's just, if we can just empower the homelessness crisis task force, whether it's social services or a mental health counselor or behavioral therapist, or even somebody that is from the Bradshaw animal shelter, because a lot of these folks are very resistant to going to halfway housing because they can't have their dogs with them. If we can just take a look and go outside of the box and see and kind of listen. I know we do a lot of points and count things when it comes to homelessness, but it's really tough to just have one solution, because it kind of doesn't work all throughout. So maybe a continuum of care. But also, I'd like to see that the county just prioritize our level of responses when it comes to like disasters and disaster recovery. I'm sure you've seen what's going on in Caldor, but if a lot of the things about firefighting and emergency response has been brought up earlier today, but if we can just take a look at that priority, that'd be great. And I do echo my other members who's mentioned that a balanced approach to community policing and perhaps peace officers, and taking a look at how much we're spending to those things, and looking at alternative ways of creating safety and services to our communities would be good. And my fourth one is, hopefully you guys as county staff are not burnt out. Y'all have been working very hard throughout this pandemic, and hopefully you guys still do have the resources that y'all need, because we're all in this together. So if you can put that there, Mr. Pahuli, that'd be great.
Will do.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you. What is the next step in the budget process? I assume that everybody's kind of sending their requests right now, and then the office of Ms. Edwards would be maybe balancing the budget and then presenting it to the Board of Supervisors for the next fiscal year?
Yeah, so as I understand it, what is happening now is a collection of comments from the boards and commissions. My understanding is perhaps later this year, the county will be kind of rolling out additional outreach directly to members of the public and stakeholders and so forth. So kind of a more robust outreach program to get the general public and the stakeholders involved in kind of further providing input on priorities. This is just sort of some initial feedback to help kind of frame up how that public outreach program is going to go, and surveys and so forth. The budget really gets kind of moving at the beginning of the year, and that's where there'll start to be some effort to kind of coalesce around some budget recommendations that'll ultimately be at the board in the, I think it's May timeframe next year, somewhere around there.
Understood. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Hopefully that satisfies your item number 2.
I believe so. Just checking in with the clerk of the board's office to make sure that you were able to record all those responses, and if there were any questions from the clerk's office.
Yeah, and I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Mr. Pahuli. Madam Clerk, are we on item 3 now?
Yes, you are. You're at your council member comments.
Okay, I want to open this up to the rest of the members of CPAC. Any comments, concerns, or something that you'd like to reiterate?
This is Member Miller, got nothing.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Mr. Thompson?
Well, I hope I wasn't too hard on you people tonight, but I'm
No, sir. I think duly noted.
getting low.
In fact, actually, Member Thompson, the chief of staff from Don Natoli already emailed us back 12 minutes ago, and they're following up on the fire marshal issue, the water agency presentation request, and the input gathered tonight by planning department. So the chief of staff for Supervisor Natoli attended our meeting earlier, and I'll follow up with her on those issues. And rest assured, I'm also pursuing the Kingsbridge / Calvine traffic and safety issue alongside Sheldon High School, because I did see a number of students, unfortunately, that could have been hit a couple days ago. So I'm with you on that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, sir, but I mean, it just frustrates me when people stop in the middle of the street and block traffic, pick up their kids. I mean, to me, that is ridiculous.
Yeah, yes, sir. I share your concern, and if hopefully we wouldn't see another young person hit. So rest assured, we're pursuing that, and I will be attending the EGUSD board meeting and bringing that up as well.
Could I make a little observation I have?
Yes, sir.
Don't call the sheriff's department, you call the highway patrol. Because the sheriff's department, for some reason or another, does not have nothing to do with traffic control.
Yep.
And if you want to get anything done, it's been my experience out here where I live, that you have to get the highway patrol come out to take care of the problems you have.
Understood, sir. I actually did include both the CHP South office as well as the EGUSD police department on that. And my goal is to hopefully get one of the safe routes to school folks. They're the ones that wear the bright orange and bright yellow vests with the big stop signs. They're kind of a little bit enforcement / safety visibility. We can get a couple of those folks, and I believe EGUSD does have the resources for that right now. We're going to try to see if we can have a mixture of that plus some sort of enforcement. Because, yeah.
Maybe we need to get a hold of Elk Grove School District and have one of their members come into our board meeting and see if they cannot run out a notice, because I had a buddy, I've never tried to apply for it because I can't apply for school bus driver, but I had a buddy that tried to apply for it, and I thought he was pretty sharp. He was a pretty good truck driver and everything, and he told me here the other day I was giving him a bad time about driving school bus. He says, I can't pass the test. He says, it's too rigorous and too complicated to pass. So I can understand why they can't find school bus drivers.
Understood, sir. So I'll follow up with that. I'll be attending one of the board meetings for that shortly. So rest assured, I'll bring that up too and send that invitation to them. Okay.
That to be the big problem. They don't have the buses transport the kids, so the parents are bringing. And a lot of these kids nowadays, they won't walk 2 blocks to go to school. Their parents have to drive them, which I think is a little ridiculous, because I used to walk from Sacramento High School to Fruit Ridge Manor Shopping Center.
Yeah, well, that's why our job is important, to empower our county staff to make sure we have safe, bikeable, and walkable schools and roads. So not to take that language away from Member Brantley, but Member Brantley, is there any comments you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to the staff. I know that we have a lot of questions, and I appreciate your patience and just the trying to be innovative and coming up with solutions. So I appreciate that. And I just one last comment on the budget. I am grateful that our opinions were that you all asked for our opinions. And I do think that, I guess my one last comment on the budget is just that I think a budget really speaks to the morals of an entity, of a city, of a county. So I'm very appreciative that Mr. Pahuli was here tonight to ask for our feedback in that. So thank you.
Could I ask one question?
Go ahead, sir.
What would happen if they had the highway patrol come out here and you'd only have to impound about 4 or 5 cars, and people had to get them out and pay $500-600 to get their car out of Hawk for parking in the middle of the street and picking up a kid? That car was impounded, you hit them in the pocketbook, it would sure start the parents to maybe thinking about maybe they better make their kids walk to school instead of driving 3 or 4 miles, 2 miles to make that kid could walk that distance. To be good for them, they'd probably get some exercise. They wouldn't be busy home pushing on playing video games and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Exercise.
Yes, sir. I'll definitely bring that up. I do want to have a combination of both enforcement and safety visuals, because I think that it has to be a practice change and not just, one ticket. I think the tickets will definitely help, but if we can't get the whole community to understand that some of their practices are unsafe, then you would have a lot more parents who are willing to pay that impounding fee and still continue that behavior. So I think you're absolutely correct that we have to combine both enforcement, education, and also a little bit of visibility, kind of coming at it at all angles, because you're right. It only takes one kid to get hit by an errant driver that makes it so that it's difficult for everybody.
The worst part of it is, I don't know whether or not if you've ever ran into a kid, but I had a kid run into the side of my car, and that is a feeling I don't ever want to have again. I was totally petrified.
Yes, sir. I hear you. I have not run a student over. I hope not to, but also I think we do have we have a shared responsibility making sure that doesn't happen. So we'll work together on making sure that goes through.
Everybody always asks me, well, Bill, what would you do if a kid, you hit a kid or something? I said, I don't know what I'd do. I know one thing, I didn't travel 10 feet before I was completely stopped. And that kid went thump, thump, thump down the side of my car, knocked the mirror off. I mean, it just scared the living stuffings out of me. And I don't ever want that experience again, because it just, I still think about it. It just makes me shiver. But I mean, it's a, I don't know. I think these parents need to be woke up, and the only way you can wake people up is if you hit them in the pocketbook where it hurts. And then they wake up to the fact that, hey, we got to make some changes here.
Duly noted, sir. Hopefully we can work together on that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but I mean.
No apologies needed, sir. Thank you. I share your perspective, and we'll work together on making sure that we can, not just the pocketbook, but we got lives at stake. So, all right. Madam Clerk, does that conclude our meeting? Are there any other announcements that you're about to make?
No. Do we have any? We do not have any public comments. And let me just double check one more time. Nope, we do not have any public comments and no calls as well.
Okay, thank you. So with everyone's permission, I'd like to conclude our meeting. It is a little bit longer than normal, but I think we were able to flesh out and hear a lot of concerns. So I really appreciate each and every one of your times. Thank you so much, and looking forward to meeting you all next month.
We're having an in-person meeting?
That I'm not sure yet. Madam Clerk?
Hi, this is Flo with the clerk's office. I can't say that it will be next month. We are still working with the county exec's office. We're also working with the public health officer to determine how we're going to do that. We're also waiting to see what happens with the executive orders that are due to expire on the 30th, but that hasn't happened yet, and we're not sure if anything is going to change. And there's other state orders as well that could determine if we're going to do that. The problem is, if we do decide to go in person, we would definitely offer a hybrid format. And so we're trying to get into the position of being able to staff that. And so that's taking a little bit of time, but we are proactive and actively working with the county executive and the public health officer and a couple of other departments as well, planning and some of the other boards that we support to see what we can do.
Thank you, Flo. I'm glad that you're thinking about a hybrid program because I am strictly staying in place.
Oh, yes. No, we recognize the fact that not only do board members want to feel safe, but staff want to be safe. And so
absolutely.
And we've been that's kind of been our focus and what I've been communicating, excuse me, with our county executive. And the consensus is there in terms of making sure our staff feel safe, the board members feel safe. Everyone has different types of health concerns or concerns, et cetera. And our job is to make sure that we provide the public with access to participating in the government actions. And in order for us to do that, the staff have to be safe. Planning staff, they have to be safe and healthy as well in order to get the material to you, in order to present the information, and so forth. And so we're trying to find a medium. With that, we need a little bit of time so that we can be fully staffed and we can adequately support the technology and the manpower that it takes to run a hybrid meeting in person, with folks who are joining online or joining in person and managing the PPE factor and all of that other stuff.
Thank you, Flo. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I want to thank you for my copy of the thing so I could be in the meeting this month.
You're welcome, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. If there's no other further comments, I'd like to conclude, and thank you. Take care.
Well, if you want to call me, I'm here 4 hours a day, so.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
You're welcome. Good night.
That concludes our meeting.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.